The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for our Economic Development and the New Tax Law free webinar, Opportunities and Concerns. My name is Matt Mullen. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy and Strategic Engagement here at IEDC, and I will be acting as our MC/second speaker. Just a few housekeeping notes. As we move through the webinar, we will be taking questions that we will save until the end, but you can ask them throughout the webinar. So as we move through the different talking points, feel free to use the questions box in your dashboard to ask questions. Second, we will distribute copies of the PowerPoint at the conclusion of the webinar when we send out the survey for feedback. There will be a link so that you can download those there as well. And then finally, we will also make available a recording of this webinar that you can download and revisit at a later time. Joining me today is Kenan Fikri, who serves as EIG's Manager for Research and Policy Development. Prior to joining EIG, Kenan was a Senior Policy Analyst and Associate Fellow at Brookings Institute's Metropolitan Policy Program. There he was responsible for conceptualizing and executing a wide array of economic research and policy projects. An expert in place-based economic analysis, Kenan has considerable experience advising state and local officials on economic development and regional competitiveness strategies. Kenan has also served as a consultant with the World Bank's Competitive Cities team. Kenan obtained his master's degree in local economic development from the London School of Economics and his bachelor's in international relations and economics at American University. And we are very pleased to have Kenan here with us today. And at this point, I will hand it over to him.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. I am happy to tell you about the Opportunity Zones program, which was included in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and has the potential to be one of the most important new economic development programs and tools issued at the federal level in quite some time. The Opportunity Zones program itself was developed as an innovative bipartisan solution to expand the geography of economic growth in this country. It is very much a kind of a product of the uneven recovery and a lot of minds coming together thinking about how we can involve more places in the country's rapid economic growth. So several years ago, there was a group of thinkers and policymakers and folks from EIG got together and felt the need to both rethink and recommit to place-based policy at the federal level. So back in, I think 2015 it was, we had Jared Bernstein, who was Joe Biden's, Vice President Biden's chief economist, and Kevin Hassett, who is now President Trump's chair of economic advisors, come together to kind of review past place-based economic development initiatives, see where they fell short on their promise or what strengths they had, but then also envision a new program that could unlock additional private capital for investment in distressed communities. And then fast forward a little bit, we had two great co-sponsors in the Senate in the form of Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, and Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, as well as on the House side, Representative Pat Tiberi from Ohio, Republican, and Representative Ron Kind from Wisconsin, Democrat, come together to co-sponsor what became the Investing in Opportunity Act, which was the predecessor for the Opportunity Zones program. We have to give a special shout out to Senator Scott, who was instrumental in making sure that this program got into the tax package and carried it and kept it in. And he, I think, given his personal history, felt very viscerally the need to try to come up with innovative solutions to help places and hardworking people in them that are right now too often on the sidelines of economic growth. Yeah, so what is the program? The program is designed to help seed the next generation of enterprise in communities that desperately need it. So it is meant to spur long-term private sector investments in low-income communities all across the country. And I'll get into the mechanisms of the program in detail, but kind of the broad introductory overview is that what this does is it provides a frictionless way for investors to reinvest capital gains currently, tied up in stocks, mutual funds, real estate, what have you, and transfer those into vehicles that just invest in distressed communities through opportunity funds. And I'll get to what those funds actually look like as well. And then in exchange for putting their money to work in distressed communities, there are some modest tax incentives tied to long-term holdings that will make this provision attractive or potentially very attractive to investors. So this is the first new National Community Investment Program in over 15 years, and has the potential, as I said, to be one of the largest in kind of economic development history in the U.S., which is why we're really excited about it. And it gets to one of the many great American paradoxes we have in this country, in that we have capital scarcity amid capital abundance. Right now, there are $6 trillion tied up in capital gains, unrealized, in the stock market and mutual funds alone. And at the same time, 3/4 of venture capital funding in this country goes to only 3 states: New York, California, and Massachusetts. And 50%, over 50% of minority business owners claim that they can't, they have unmet financing needs and can't access the capital that they otherwise would want in order to grow their businesses. So before I get into the mechanics of the program, I want to put a couple things in your minds right now, keep in the back of your head, on how this program is special and maybe different from other ones that you're used to. So first and foremost, this is an investor incentive. It's not one that is awarded to individual companies. So it is a new complementary tool in your toolbox, but it's not one that's going to very easily pile on to the subsidy package that maybe is going to go along with a mega deal. And second, all incentives here pertain to capital gains, both present and future. There are 2 incentives at work, and they do not pertain to net operating revenue or costs. So again, this isn't an incentive that encourages the kind of conducting of business from a certain locale. It's one that encourages investment in a locale. So because of those 2 things, in only rare instances will this appeal to, because of because of legal aspects of the legislation, appeal to or even be available for an established company looking to site a new facility, for example. And many existing firms will have much cheaper financing options, and they won't want to tie up their equity in an opportunity fund investment vehicle going down the road, and all that'll make more sense as we keep going. So fourth, there are no upfront appropriations here, which means there's no cap on how much can be invested. This is in contrast to a program like the New Markets Tax Credit, where Congress appropriates $400 million or whatever the number is, and then those get allocated from there, and you can't get more more investment beyond what that will leverage. This has no cap, and it can scale to the need and the opportunity. The program is market-based, so that means that investors will determine how large or small it eventually becomes by how many investable opportunities they identify. So being designated as an opportunity zone does not guarantee investment. So that's going to be where a lot of the local economic development entities come in down the road. So as I said, this is a new type of incentive that should attract a different type of investor to your communities. And it's a novel tool, but that means it's going to require some new thinking in order to get right. And I hope to prompt that among you all today. And then last point is that, capital is not a panacea for many distressed communities. The states and localities are still on the hook for education and training, for nurturing startup ecosystems, and other, complementary initiatives that determine whether or not a program like this can reach its maximum potential and really be a catalyst for truly inclusive economic growth. Okay, so how does the program work? So this is from the investor perspective. We'll get to how it works more from a local perspective next. So the program offers investors 3 incentives for putting some of their unrealized capital gains to work rebuilding economically distressed communities. The first is a temporary deferral on capital gains taxes until the year 2026, or if they get rid of their opportunity zone investment earlier, then the tax bill will become due at that earlier time. So the idea with the deferral is that we want the full amount of capital at work in distressed communities. So we don't want to take the tax bill out early, we want to take it out later. So second is a reduction in the amount of capital gains taxes that the investor ultimately owes when they have to make Treasury whole so by 2026 or whenever they cash out of the investment. There are two incentives tied to long-term holdings here. One, at 5 years, your capital gains tax bill gets reduced by 10%, and then if you hold it for 7 years, it gets reduced by another 5%. And then if you hold it for 10 years, step 3, this is the big incentive out there. So any capital gains on an investment made through an opportunity fund accrues tax-free as long as the investor holds it for 10 years. So this is the big potential upside. And there are, as I said before, there are two different incentives at work here. The first one allows investors to defer and then slightly reduce the original capital gains tax bill that they owe, but they still owe that by at least by 2026 at the latest. The second incentive only refers to investments made through the opportunity fund. If those fund stakes are held for 10 years or more, then any new capital gains are tax-free. And that's where we hope this will really catalyze long-term patient capital or distressed communities. So I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but I more want to let you know that this, as well as a kind of narrative walkthrough of what it shows, is available on our website at eig.org/opportunity zones. It essentially just shows you what the potential investor upside is for putting their money to work in an opportunity zone. The gray bar shows what would happen if you just take a standard portfolio investment that we're assuming the same return here that an opportunity fund offers. But an opportunity fund, especially 10 years down the road, can offer a significant extra return for investors on top of what they may be able to earn elsewhere in some sort of non-tax advantaged vehicle. Okay, so what are opportunity funds? Well, first, there are multiple pieces to the legislation, so I'll try to break it out into 3 buckets for you. 1, what are opportunity funds? 2, what are the type of eligible investments that can be made into places? And then 3, how do opportunity zones get designated? So this slide covers funds and eligible investments. So funds are investment vehicles that are specially organized and incorporated as corporations or partnerships that hold at least 90% of their assets in qualified opportunity zone business property. So any investment into an opportunity zone that seeks to take advantage of the tax favored status needs to occur through a fund. So you can't invest directly into an opportunity zone business without putting your money through a fund. There are three types of investments that are eligible here for capital from funds. The first is the original issue stock of a qualified zone corporation. So that's going to be any new company that starts in a zone or any expanding company that's issuing new shares in the zone. The second is an interest in a qualified zone partnership. That's the same idea, but this will likely pertain to real estate projects. I think that's the partnership is a typical organization for those projects. And the third is tangible property in a qualified opportunity zone, as long as substantially all of that property is used in a zone. So what does that mean in layman's terms? It means opportunity zones can invest in high growth startups, Main Street businesses, real estate, manufacturing facilities, brownfield sites, entrepreneurship incubators and accelerators, co-working spaces, rental housing, a whole lot of different stuff. The only thing that's excluded really are sin businesses, which ranges from casinos to golf courses. Now, who do we expect to stand up funds? A variety. So anyone can stand up a fund as long as they're incorporated as opportunity funds and invest in, reach that 90% investment in opportunity zone criteria. But we expect, and we've been talking to a number of folks in all these categories who are going to set up funds, but that institutional investors and investment banks, ranging from the Bank of America's and Goldman Sachs's of the world to the JP Morgan's and Wells Fargo's, impact investors, CDFIs, multifamily offices, wealthy individuals, philanthropies, venture capital partnerships, angel groups, real estate investment trusts, And all these folks should be interested in establishing their own or putting their capital into opportunity funds. Funds can be passive, more like mutual funds that retail investors may want to put their capital gains to work in, or they can be more tightly held and more active, where I imagine a venture capital group, for example, would want to perhaps pay the salary of the fund manager and be involved in the investment decisions that the fund makes. An interesting and key point for you all to consider is that localities are likely going to be able to set up their funds as well. What this would exactly look like, I imagine maybe a local economic development organization or perhaps Chamber of Commerce would incorporate a fund. It would be a separate legal entity, of course, but maybe they pay the salary of the fund manager, and then it would exist as a vehicle for anyone who wants to put their capital to work investing in distressed communities in that region. It could manage those developments, and it would be a vehicle that would be tied to the region. Some things to keep in mind: there are related party restrictions that make this, unlikely that a company will set up its own fund and then that fund would invest in that own company's subsidiaries or properties. Treasury is still writing, has a lot of work to do writing the rules here. So a lot of big questions that are still open that eventually taxpayers are going to have to answer. But the spirit of the legislation is that this is going to be a vehicle to make new investments in expanding companies, new and expanding companies, capital-starved companies, and kind of physical real estate development assets that otherwise would not be made. And again, when you're thinking about who may take advantage of this, remember that the real benefit from the legislation comes from the 10-year plus capital gains exemption on the investment. So not on the fact that the investment is made, but on the appreciation of the investment value down the road. And I'll come back to that next. So next critical question is going to be opportunity zones. What are they and how do they get designated? So governors of every state and territory, so this includes DC, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has a special exemption where all of it's eligible. Even Guam, can nominate up to 25% of their low-income / high-poverty census tracts as opportunity zones. So about 40% of the average state's census tracts are eligible to be nominated. Only a quarter of those eligible ones can be included. It's important to realize that this is a use or lose opportunity. If your governor chooses not to designate any zone in your state, then no entity in your state can be eligible for this potentially sizable pot of capital and new asset class to open up. So it's really imperative that you, after this call, reach out to your governors, make sure that they are on the ball, and of course, as you're at it, probably advocate for some of your low-income census tracts to be eligible. And the low-income census tract definition is going to be what you're used to from New Markets Tax Credit, and the CDFI fund, there'll be a link at the end of this slide, also has a map of all eligible zones already up online. So the bill included a pretty ingenious action-forcing mechanism for Treasury. It gave governors 90 days from enactment, which means period ending March 21st, 2018, to submit their nominations to the Treasury Secretary or request a 30-day extension. So Treasury, because of that kind of fire lit under them in the statute, already has communications out to governors. We believe all governors' offices are aware of the opportunity, and they're moving quickly. So that means that you need to move quickly as well. So governors are given broad discretion when it comes to designating zones that meet the basic criteria, but they should be consulting with local leaders. I think that's standard best practice, and we hope that they're going to ask people who represent the economic development interests and leaders in a community before selecting zones from underneath them. So governors can layer on additional criteria if they so choose. So this is meant to, the legislation is intended to give a lot of local control here. It says that tracts only have to be low-income census tracts, but a state like Colorado, for example, has layered on additional criteria that's important to them, given their local kind of concerns and peculiarities to narrow down the field of eligible tracts. Congress also included some non-binding guidance for governors. So the first point is that They should really seek out places that are already the focus of mutually reinforcing state, local, and private economic development initiatives, especially if you are already putting a lot of public capital towards an initiative, towards a transit-oriented development project, or towards a great streets project or something. You want to make sure that that taxpayer ROI is increased by bringing private capital in on top. So this is meant to, there should be alignment here between your own priority zones and what the governor designates as eligible for this private capital. Places that have demonstrated past success utilizing programs such as NMCC, enterprise zones, promise zones, all those are places that have kind of a demonstrated track record of successfully leveraging possibilities like the Opportunity Zones program. So you'll likely get greater impact in places with experience than places without. And then third, any place that has suffered major recent job losses from plant closures or relocations, it would be great to put this kind of net below those places before too much decline sets in or anything. Now, nominations should balance need and opportunity. So as I mentioned before, designation does not guarantee investment. This is a private sector-driven, market-oriented, market-based program. If an investor does not find an investable opportunity in a zone, it will not get investment. So that means that there are some places, I mean, if you have low-income census tracts that are primarily residential, it's unlikely that there will be any, especially if they're almost exclusively zoned residential, unlikely that there will be any private activity that goes there. Similarly, if you have some really disadvantaged rural regions, but that don't have any infrastructure, like highway connections or anything, it might be difficult for a private investor to find a way to make the economics of that investment work. You'll know best you'll know what's right for your community, but those are some considerations to keep in mind. Absorptive capacity of new capital, connectivity, and ecosystem support assets should all be taken into consideration. And then, I think economic development best practice plays here too, where proximity to research universities, for example, could be really important if you want to use this as a way to make sure that new companies that are spun out of universities or technologies that are commercialized out of them grow into companies that are rooted in place. We've been talking to some venture capital groups that are associated with some of the country's best research universities, and they are really excited to be able to say, like, hey, look, we have a pot of capital that you can tap into, equity capital. That means, you can stay and grow your company in our inner city region or in our rural region, and you don't have to up to the coast in order to expand and grow. So this could be a really powerful tool. Okay, how do zones differ from other geographically targeted community investment programs? So I think, and the program is really unique in that it combines all these aspects. So some other programs may have exhibited some of these, but I think the Opportunity Zones program stands apart by combining them all together. So all incentives pertain to capital gains. These are resources that were, in the past on the sidelines of economic development. This is meant to unlock a new pool of capital and create a new asset class. And second, this is targeted. It narrows the number of low-income census tracts. It forces governors and their local counterparts to kind of choose a down select and prioritize different districts. And this is because, in the past, successful programs, funded plenty of investments, but often they were spread too thinly across the map to really catalyze systematic, economic development and turn an entire neighborhood around. And also, this is necessary for the Opportunity Zones program to limit tracts because, investors, the real tie-off or the real attraction here for investors is that long-term appreciation, and that's only going to be possible if other investors and follow-on investments come in as well. So you need that concentrating effect in order to increase the chance of success for this model. So I think that's a really important point. It's also simple. After meeting the basic qualifications, investors and businesses face none of the micromanagement that limited uptake of past programs. There's no employment requirements here. There is no lengthy approval process. You don't have to apply in order to know if your program gets off the ground. As long as you know it qualifies and it can be made through a fund, then you are up and ready to go. And so part of the rationale here is that investors bear all the risk. There's not much taxpayer money on the line up front. So given that there's no credit here, it's harder, and no direct subsidy, it's harder to layer on stipulations if you want people to take advantage of the program. Let's see, it's flexible. The program is designed to foster various types of investments. In the ideal scenario, it will foster a whole portfolio in a given place. It'll foster real estate, operating businesses, new businesses, and the whole kind of gamut of what it takes for community success. It rewards patient capital, and there's no upfront subsidy here. It doesn't pick winners. Funds and investors make their own decisions. It is designed more for startups and new companies than it is for incumbent companies to take advantage of. And key point is that it's scalable. So given that there's no cap on appropriations, the program can really grow as large as investors want it to be, and as large as kind of the opportunity allows. It also gives investors a direct stake in the community's future. Again, since payoff is tied to appreciation, this program doesn't reward individual projects. It ties investor payoff to community success. So how might the program manifest itself on the ground? So we expect it'll manifest itself maybe most visibly in the funding of new companies. So here I put up the Brandery, which is an incubator in Cincinnati, Ohio, located near in a previously struggling district that was a place of riots back when I lived there, I guess over a decade ago now. But it's since turned around, and this is the Brandery is tied to Cincinnati's specialty in marketing and consumer services, and trying to launch, the next generation of new companies, diversifying off this economic cluster and driver in Cincinnati. These companies, new ones that formed, if this incubator is located in an opportunity zone, would be eligible to offer their investors, these tax preference equity stakes, and that could be a huge upside for investors if they hold it 10 years down the road and the company is successful. Similarly, Launch Tennessee is a really great entrepreneurship and ecosystem development program in Tennessee. There's a network of incubators and mentorship hubs and what have you, but this is an opportunity to encourage companies that maybe come through a program like that to make sure that they locate and try to scale in opportunity zones so they can be eligible for this tax advantage investment. Second one, maybe innovation districts or transit-oriented development. First picture up there is of the Cortex initiative in St. Louis, where they're filling in what used to be a relatively empty corridor of the city between some research universities and other anchor institutions. They're putting in development lines. They have all sorts of incubators, anchor companies, anchor institutions, new residential property, and commercial property all coming in. You could envision, if the governor chose to designate these areas as opportunity zones, you could really get the critical mass of investment coming in and investor interest. Or you could use opportunity zones adjacent to a development like this to spread the wealth as it's generated and gets off the ground. It's important to consider that so opportunity funds can invest in infrastructure assets. So if you try to align this with the transit-oriented development project, some TIF, I don't know how exactly it would overlay with TIFs, but I'm sure there are scenarios where it could. This could, again, be a really powerful tool to realize the vision that many places have for their kind of distressed portions of their inner cities that they're trying to bring back. And then similarly, Oklahoma City is also trying to build an innovation district. And again, this could be a powerful tool to give investors an extra boost. Then brownfield redevelopment. Take a city like Fall River, Massachusetts. They've had big success in converting some of what are really fantastic old buildings and old bones and structures that had fallen into disrepair, in transforming those into modern commercial or residential developments. This would, again, if you bring the market back and bring property value back to these districts, the payoff for investors could be really huge, and this should increase interest in that. And then, again, it could also be an important tool to get investors to redevelop kind of large Superfund sites or really problematic tracts that are priorities for turning around. Next slide. Okay, 3 stages of next steps for you to be thinking about. The first is zone designation. This requires immediate action on your part and on the parts of governors. You should be working closely with your state counterparts to provide that all-important local market intelligence of what your priority tracks are, so that the highest priority ones that align with your existing strategic imperatives are included in your governor's designations that are sent to Treasury in middle of March or middle of April if they request the extension. So you should hold your state representatives account in in holding bottom-up consultations in this process. I think that given the relatively short timeline, some governors are their instincts may be to bunker down and do this all themselves, and I think that would be a mistake and a disservice. So there's a real important role for you to play there. Second, so all through 2018, funds will be or things will be set in motion around setting up funds. As I said, anyone can do this, including localities, but you should also raise awareness among your local banks, financial institutions, investor networks, business grandees, high net worth individuals, and encourage them to think about whether or not your region should stand up a fund, whether it can be capitalized with local capital. And some funds will be national in scope, but others we imagine, we know that there's real appetite among investors to try to do well while doing good in their communities, and they're willing to put up capital and take a bet on their communities. So figure out how much appetite there is in your district for that, and then consider whether you should be standing up a fund yourself. Ongoing, really important, is going to be making sure that there's uptake here, making sure that companies or that funds find investable opportunities in the zones in your remit. And then making sure that zones, national, that may not be based in your region, know of opportunities in your region. So I think economic development professionals are going to be called on to play that coordinator and liaison role, perhaps in a way that they're not used to now. But the asset class is going to be much larger, and it won't be as risky linking up with a venture capitalist who might poach your firm to their region, because now those venture capitalists are going to have an incentive to make sure that these companies grow and scale where they are located. And then finally, I'd say just get creative. This is a new program. There are lots of different scenarios that we have not thought up yet, that other folks have not thought up yet, but this could be a really powerful tool. So think how your region can differentiate itself and really take advantage of it. And then before I turn it back to Matt, I'll just say here's a list of resources. It'll be available on IEDC's website as well, I imagine. And if you have any questions, you can email me. My email is Kenan, Kenan, @eig.org, or you can email just the info@eig.org, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that come up down the road. So with that, I'll transfer it back to Matt.
Great. Thanks very much, Kenan. I know you've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure there are many, many questions. This is a great opportunity for many of our members. So at this time, I'll encourage you to use the questions box in your dashboard. You can go ahead and type those questions in, and we will get to those here in just a second. We're going to transition now to talk about briefly an additional note from the tax bill that was passed at the end of December. There is a particular section in the tax bill that has caused some concern among IEDC members that have asked us to take a look at it and see what we can learn about it. And it's section 13312 of the tax law. This bill was passed on December 22nd. It's the most sweeping tax bill, tax reform, whatever you want to call it, since 1986. And so over the next few months and potentially few years, these sorts of things will continue to sort of pop up. And so as they do, we will address them. But this one in particular has risen to near the top of our list of things. Essentially, what this provision of the tax bill is doing is eliminating the tax-exempt status of certain types of contribution to capital. And so this includes cash, land, equipment, and infrastructure, among other things. And you'll note that I am using the word may. because it is, and the whole caveat to all of this is that this is so new. I will encourage you very strongly to talk to your own tax and legal counsel about what, if any, implications there are for this. I wouldn't, I would almost characterize this as a heads up FYI more than anything else. It does not include, or may not include, abatements, reductions, credits, or exemptions. The changes went into effect as of December 22nd, 2017. Anything before this date is considered to be exempt. However, it may not be, depending on the structure of the offering. If it is something that was completed as a part of a deal prior to December 22nd, 2017, but the actual financial benefit would not impact the taxpayer until after that date, it is possible that it will not be exempt. Further, the bill suggests that anything included as part of a master development plan would be exempt. There are some additional resources that I'll draw your attention to. The first, of course, is the actual bill, which includes some additional Congressional Research Service summaries of different components. The second is a blog post from one of our members in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. The third is an article that was written by a couple lawyers that was posted in Bloomberg Tax. And then finally, drawing your attention to the Good Jobs First website through their subsidy tracker to kind of talk through a little bit about what specific components of an incentive might actually be impactful. Looking at a standard type of deal, there is a offering of an abatement that might stretch out over multiple years. There's offerings of tax credits. There's offerings of certain types of state-level withholdings for jobs created. Those sorts of things likely are not to be impacted by this bill. However, if a state or locality offers a business cash, offers a business grants, offers a business any kind of land for free, the value of that land, all of those things would no longer, moving forward, be considered tax exempt, and so the taxpayer would be liable to pay federal tax on those sorts of things. As we move forward over the next few months, IEDC will be monitoring this closely, waiting to get additional guidance from the IRS on how this will play out. The IRS, as you can imagine, is rather busy these days with it being tax season and having to figure out how to implement and execute the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But we will continue to keep you posted on this. We would encourage you again to speak with your own tax counsel, legal counsel, reach out to particularly your state level economic development folks, and make sure that this is at least on their radar so that they know moving forward that potentially, according to this bill, certain incentives that were previously offered under no tax will be taxable moving forward. And with that, we are going to go ahead and jump into questions. Bear with us here. All right, we'll begin with our first question here. Please feel free to continue to ask questions in the question box on the dashboard.
Okay, we'll start with what is an unrealized capital gain? That is a great question and the premise of the entire thing. Unrealized capital gain would be, so essentially the appreciation on any investment that an investor currently holds. So say you got into Facebook early when it was $10 and that is now, when Facebook stock was $10, now Facebook stock is $210. That would make it, your capital gain would be $200. And that $200 you would normally owe capital gains tax on once you sell the investment. So you would have to sell the investment to put it into an opportunity fund, but you wouldn't have to pay the taxes that you owe on it for until 2026, assuming that you hold your opportunity fund investment for the periods envisioned in the program. So similarly, any appreciation on a commercial real estate property, it's the difference between what the investor paid for it initially and then what they sell it for. That difference is the capital gain, and that's the pot of capital that we're talking about here. And again, just in case the stat was missed at the beginning, so our latest calculations as of the end of 2017 is that U.S. households are sitting on $3.8 trillion in capital gains from stocks and mutual funds alone, and then U.S. corporations are sitting on a further 2.3 trillion, but that's a relatively narrow estimate. It's much harder to get to figure out what the corporate number is. But given that the corporate one's a conservative estimate, that means the pot of capital at play here is up to $6 trillion. Of course, only a fraction of that would be eligible to go into an opportunity, or only a fraction of that would be likely to be sold and then rolled over into opportunity funds. But even a small fraction, we're talking about a lot of money. And when Congress was scoring the bill, it was envisioned that tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, would be moved by this. Okay, so keep following through.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. The next question is: can the deferral and reduction benefits be realized simply by placing the unrealized capital gains in an opportunity zone without making an actual investment in a business property? So no. So the gains. So Treasury is very much. Or hold it up for a second. Treasury is aware, that there are many possible loopholes that people could conjure up here, and they're going to try to close each one successively as best they can. And there are a number that were envisioned in the writing of the legislation that were preemptively closed in the text of the statute itself. So there will be a date certain by which opportunity funds, I think it's going to be the end of 2019, but don't hold me to that. But date certain by which funds have to have a certain percentage of their assets or of their capital deployed in opportunity zone or eligible assets. Again, eligible assets are going to be the stocks of companies that are located in opportunity zones, and they have to have substantially all of their business conducted in zones. They can't just have one footprint in there. They have to be substantially opportunity zone businesses, partnership interests, and then actual business property, which can range from machinery to commercial property or a development itself. If an investor purchases used property, that property has to be substantially improved in order to qualify. So that Treasury will release guidelines on exactly what substantially improved means under what scenarios for what specific types of property. Okay, let's see. How is the match made between the funds and the development opportunity? That is a great question, and that is going to be contingent on. So there's no omniscient broker here. Funds are going to be, the fund managers will be responsible for finding opportunities, and developers or entrepreneurs in these zones with fundable projects or fundable companies will be responsible for seeking out capital and investment, just as they are now. I think that's where local economic development organizations can take on a new and really important role in making sure that those relationships get brokered. That's also why you should be thinking about ways to plug this into your kind of existing existing master plans where where investors may go to find opportunities, or plugging into your existing entrepreneurship support networks and mentorship networks or incubators and accelerators that may have pre-existing networks with investors as well. But there's a real, again, if the matches aren't made, the program will be a bit of a dud, and that would be a shame. So I think there's a real role to make sure, a real broker role to play. Okay, is only rental housing eligible? What about condos? I cannot answer that question yet with confidence, so that will be, so stay tuned to forthcoming rules and regulations from Treasury, whether residential property that is then sold is eligible. So I don't know. Let's see, is there any guidance on how to structure an opportunity fund currently? No, Treasury does not have that guidance beyond what the statute says, which is just that it needs to be incorporated as a fund. Again, I'm not a tax lawyer, so I assume that there's some standard procedure there for incorporating a fund, but I don't know what that is myself. And then the fund just has to have 90%, maintain 90% of its asset portfolio in eligible properties. I think it's, on that point, I'll say, so funds can change over their, so a fund doesn't have to keep its money in the same company over the course of the 10-year period or however long. The fund just needs to make sure that all of its portfolio qualifies. So it can make new investments, it can dispose of investments over the course of the period. It just has to have, as I said, it has to maintain that 90% eligibility. Okay, does an individual have to be a QIB? Is that qualified investment banker to invest in an opportunity fund? So, anyone who has capital gains can put their money into a fund. They'll be responsible for finding a fund. They should talk to their financial services provider or try to maybe talk to a regional economic development organization or chamber of commerce, anyone who may be aware of what funds exist or are being set up. But again, so we don't know yet whether, for example, an investor or whether an individual can put their savings into a fund and then whether they would benefit from the tax-exempt 10-year holding, because they clearly wouldn't be eligible for the deferral since they're not actually deferring any gains. That's a question that Treasury will have to answer. Yeah, okay, I think to answer that, I'll move on. What would an O fund look like? Would you provide an example of a money transaction between investor, O fund, and opportunity zone business property? Okay, I will give two examples there. So say a large national bank sets up a fund that looks a lot like a mutual fund that develops a diversified national portfolio of eligible opportunity zone investments. There, an investor, a retail investor, can take capital gains that maybe exist in another brokerage account, roll them over into this new opportunity fund product that the bank offers, but doesn't take really any sort of active role in what that fund then invests in. The fund has a professional, dedicated investment manager or multiple managers who maybe work out of multiple regional offices that are responsible for identifying companies to invest in that are eligible in opportunity zones or finding eligible property investments. And that's kind of made all passively by the fund manager. A second model could be, say, a university wants to capitalize a fund with capital gains in its endowment and also offer its alumni network the opportunity to invest in a fund that has a commitment to that university's backyard and in generating and in investing in the next generation of companies spinning out of that university's technology and research expertise. So the university may incorporate a fund, capitalize it, some itself, some from its high net worth individual investor network, and then that university fund has a very mission-oriented focus of investing just locally or in technologies that are spun out from that firm. A third scenario may be a local economic development organization wants to offer a CDFI. Yeah, I'll do CDFI actually. A CDFI has a commitment to investing in particular neighborhoods in a particular city and a preference for minority or female or some other criteria of businesses in that zone. That CDFI would set up a fund. Chances are they know the investment opportunities very well because they have an expertise in their locality. They could offer that investment vehicle to anyone locally, nationally, to invest in, and then just distribute that money in investments locally. And we should say that many forward-thinking CDFIs are really interested and excited to engage in equity investing because a lot of them do plenty of lending, but equity investing is a real gap in their markets that they see that they could fill, which would be nice. Okay, next question. Does the OZ incentive differentiate short-term and long-term capital gains? That's a good question. I don't think it does. So it's, unless if I'm misunderstanding the question, please type it in again and I'll try to answer it. Oh, the next one. I.e., can I get the deferral and reduction in basis benefits for both a short-term and long-term gain that I roll over into an opportunity zone? So yes, if any gain can be rolled over into the fund, and let's see. So it doesn't matter if that's short or long term. But so the deferral, you have to keep your money in an opportunity zone or in an opportunity fund, sorry, in order to benefit from the 5-year deferral and 7-year, in order to benefit from the deferral and the step ups in basis. You can cash out part of your investment in an opportunity fund at any point and leave some of the rest there, and then kind of each portion of the investment will be treated accordingly. The remaining portion that's in there, it's long-term capital gain. If you hold it for 10 years or longer, would be eligible for those favored incentives too. Okay, will this follow the same schedule as NMTC for reselecting eligible tracks? How often will these be refreshed? Great question. So tracks will be eligible for 10 years after designation, so for the duration of the program. If Congress decides to renew the program, chances are there'll be a refresh at that point to refresh to the definitions, and the second stage of the program may have a different set of places that are eligible. In general, the new markets tax credit is kind of a natural predecessor to this program, and this program builds on many of the basic criteria that are in there. We expect that Treasury will look to NMTC for a lot of the technical questions that remain open now. So I think that's a really good precedent for you to consider. I will mention though, given the question that, so NMTC, there's no down select among eligible low-income census tracts. So I think it's 40% of all U.S. census tracts qualify as low income, and they are home to 43% of the country's population. And all of those are eligible for NMTC, but only 1/4 of those census tracts will be eligible to become opportunity zones. So it would make a lot of sense for places to nominate zones that also have received NMTC investment, since there aren't all that many in the grand scheme of things, NMTC investments that are out there, but there's nothing that forces those geographies to overlap. So would building a rail freight transport facility in an existing commerce park qualify? That is a great question. I think it depends. It depends totally on how it's structured. But if the commerce park is an eligible zone and that facility is financed, conducts substantially all of its business out of the zone, and if the investors are the ones who are investing in it rather than an individual company, then yes, it should qualify, but with a big proviso that Treasury needs to weigh in first, and then you should consult with a tax lawyer. Okay, what level of operating control will the O Fund have on the ozone investment made to the ozone business? Also, exit strategy for investment. So the level of operating control is a good question. I think it'll be relatively passive, but that being said, so some investors, especially individuals who set up their own funds, will probably want to have a higher touch relationship with their investments. So I expect that those will be more tightly managed. So I think this will be an array, and O-zones will differentiate themselves, O funds will differentiate themselves along quite a spectrum, and you'll see many different relationships. Exit strategies for investments. So the statute does include an off-ramp for companies that grow, that maybe were eligible opportunity zone companies at the beginning, were really successful, and through the natural course of their scaling, grow out of being just an opportunity zone business. And funds have 5 years to divest from them. We don't want to penalize success, but at the end of the day, we don't want any sort of unfair advantage to accrue to the investors, or for this to become any sort of sheltering opportunity. So they do need to divest, but that's not supposed to be rushed. And there are some other technical things in the bill that may help answer that question too. Okay, did you say if a jurisdiction defers taxes or otherwise provides assistance to entice infrastructure investment, is that no longer tax-free? I think this is a question for the other.
Did you say a jurisdiction defers taxes or otherwise provides assistance to entice infrastructure investment? Is that no longer tax-free? So the question of the section of the tax bill, section 13312, is referring to whatever an incentive would have been that would have previously contributed to the capital of the organization would no longer be tax exempt. And so far, based on very, very limited analysis of what that means, the public infrastructure component of it is such that the value of whatever infrastructure enhancements are made, which could be, making a off-ramp, doing a rail spur, sewer line enhancements, those sorts of things, so far seems to be that it would not be tax exempt any further. I would suggest reaching out to a tax professional to get further clarification on that. As of yet, there is no guidance from the IRS on the specifics of this section of the tax bill.
Okay, once the fund is set up, what can the funds be used for, and how do you determine where to use them? Yeah, so once the fund is set up, the fund can invest in 3 things. They can invest in this, they can take equity investments, so buying the stocks of new businesses or partnership interests, and then they can also invest in real tangible property. So that would be anything from like a business incubator to an infrastructure asset. Could be, if not, road or transit. Could be a port facility or a rail hub, as the previous question mentioned. Could also be any sort of kind of commercial real estate or commercial property. And then how to determine where to use them. So zones, in the legislation or in the program, there are actually very few things that local entities are required to do. I think for it to be successful and for it to benefit your communities, you'll find a lot of opportunities to weigh in and engage. But really, funds, once zones are designated, investments will be made outside of, investors will find investment opportunities, entrepreneurs will find investors, developers will find investors. There need be no role for local economic development organizations. But I think many EDOs will want to make sure that there is a fund that specializes in their region, so that they may find, or if there's not one that's being set up privately, they may take the initiative to do it themselves. And then those funds they should, in order to be successful and in order to offer investors a reasonable return, which, given that this is market-based, investors will be looking for that return. They should probably be professionally managed, but they'll have a little more of a mission of, investing in, maybe investing in main streets in struggling parts of the city, in investing in maybe critical infrastructure in rural areas, or trying to seed the next generation of growth companies and businesses in the region. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. No. What is the expected threshold of project costs that will make ozone feasible? No idea. Next question. question. Can master development plans, this is...
Yeah. Can master development plans created after December 2017 keep property billings infrastructure exempt from federal tax on incentives? The answer to your question, unfortunately, is going to be, again, to talk to a tax professional or a tax lawyer on this. If something, based on what we've read so far in this bill, and again, a very limited analysis that's out there so far, if something is included in a master development plan, even after the date of the bill, in theory, it would no longer, or it would continue to be tax exempt. So yes, is my limited answer. But again, be sure to talk with a tax professional lawyer on that. And then if there are, I'm going to do a last call for questions here. While I'm doing that last call for questions, Kenan, did you address the eligibility of contiguous?
I did not address the eligibility of contiguous tracts. Okay, that's a very important point. So one of the technicalities, but it could be very important, something for you to be aware of as you're speaking with your states on getting zones nominated, is that in order to provide some real-world flexibility, because the economy and neighborhoods do not exactly follow census tract boundaries, the legislation called for governors to have leeway to have 5% of their eligible tracts. So in most states, this is not many that we're talking about. 5% of their eligible tracts can exceed the low-income census tract criteria as long as they are contiguous with, or which as long as they are adjacent to an eligible low-income census tract that does get nominated. So the contiguous tract that qualifies just based on contiguity alone, not on low-income status, cannot be much better off than the tract that is eligible and being included. It can only have a median family income up to 125% of the median family income in the eligible tract. But this is important for kind of creating zones that are economically meaningful, for perhaps spreading some nascent activity in one zone that's slightly better off to another zone that's worse off, to another tract that's worse off. And here I'll put in a plug for the CDFI fund map that is linked to in the resources tab in my presentation, because they have already done the hard work for you of identifying contiguous tracts that are eligible based on their median family income too. So you can click in the legends there. There's a special box for you to tick to see which ones qualify based on that criteria. So we think that should be really important for folks to cobble together meaningful zones. Yeah.
So that's 5% of the total 25%.
5% of 25%. Right. So say you're a relatively rural, well-off state, like some of those out west that only have 25 tracts that are eligible. Oh, so that's another thing that I did not mention. So if you have fewer than 25 low-income census tracts naturally, you can nominate, or if you have fewer than 100, low-income census tracts naturally, you can nominate up to 25 of them. So yeah, there's a floor of 25 tracts. All states will be able to nominate at least that many. And then 5% of 25 comes down to just one tract or two tracts can be substituted based on this criteria. And also, that's an important point. If it qualifies on contiguity, it's a substitute for one that would otherwise qualify on low income alone. Yep.
All right, and our last question.
Last question. How much time will investors have to liquidate their unrealized capital gains and deploy the proceeds to O funds while still being considered unrealized? Yes. So it compares very closely to 1031 like-kind exchange. That's one of the predecessors of the bill, or one of the areas of precedent. And so part of the answer to that question will depend on how quickly Treasury gets its act together in putting out the rules and the regulations. So as the longer it takes Treasury, the higher the likelihood that the kind of mile markers with date certain that are envisioned in the legislation or written out in the legislation, that those get bumped back a little. But right now it's, I believe it's 6 months, or by the end of 2018. Hold on. Yep. I'm scanning my papers. 180-day period. Yeah, so you have a half year from the date of such sale or exchange. So yeah, 180 days is going to be your marker.
Okay, final thoughts, anything, top two things to remember?
Top 2 things to remember, get in touch with your governors right away. And then second thing to remember is that, yeah, this is just a new and exciting opportunity. It's a different tool in your toolbox. It will require a bit of a mind shift, given that the incentives go to investors and they're based on capital gains. So they don't go to individual companies, and it's not based on operating revenue or existing bottom line costs. So I'd encourage everyone to think about it and try to innovate around it, and it has the potential for great success.
Great. On the impact of section 13312, big takeaway from that, consult your tax professionals and lawyers about how this is going to impact your work. You know, I think local level versus state level on the cash front, you know, states are definitely in a different position than most localities in terms of how much cash they're going to be able to offer. Localities might be more impacted by, you know, the giving away of land or the enhancements of public infrastructure, those sorts of things. Unfortunately, you know, we're all sort of waiting to see what IRS is going to do on, you know, how these things are going to be implemented. So stay tuned, but I would strongly encourage you to proactively stay tuned, and we will keep you posted as this develops. You know, I'd like to say thank you to Kenan for his very in-depth presentation on this program. I think a lot of folks are going to find this useful. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that EIG has been the lead on this program for years now. You know, just working their way around the hill and trying to build up support for it, and you know, saw an opportunity in this tax bill to get something good for economic developers in there. And so we're very appreciative of their leadership on this, and Kenan has been very generous with his time and expertise. So thank you very much. Again, we will share copies of the presentations individually with you at the conclusion of the webinar when you complete the survey. A recording of the survey will also be available for download. Thank you all very much for joining us. We hope to see you here in Washington next month for the Fed Forum, March 25th through the 27th. You can go online to IEDConline.org to register today. Thanks very much.